Hi guys! It has been an absolutely hectic month, but somehow I still managed to read a few books, so let's just get into those. I did finish one more book by the end of June that I haven't mentioned yet, and that was Maggie Volume 36 by Shinobu Otaka. I've talked about the series many times. I've mentioned before how the end is absolutely ridiculous, and this volume was no different. All of the rules were thrown out the window, and I'm so fed up with it, but at the same time I'm still reading it because I still love the characters. It's just the whole plot is a complete disaster. But there's only one volume left, so I'm going to read that when it comes out later this month and then be done with it. Going into actual July, the first book I finished was Heir of Navron by Michael J. Sullivan. This is the third book in the Rhaenyra Revelations, which follows two friends as they adventure through their magical land that is very heavily inspired by many different fantasy series that came before it. I know I'm always mentioning that it's definitely not the most unique fantasy series I've ever read, but there were actually a lot of twists in this one that I didn't see coming. Most of them I saw coming, but there were some that I didn't see coming, so I appreciated that. So much happened in this book. It was action-packed, so it was a fast-paced story, even if it wasn't a very well written story. I listened to the first two on audiobook, and then this book is the only one that I was reading physically because there was no audiobook from my library. And it's so much more apparent how subpar the actual writing is when I'm reading it physically versus listening to it. So that was a little interesting thing I learned in this last book. I knew it wasn't the best writing. It's not super flowery. It's not special in any way. It's very simplistic, and it comes across even more when you're reading it on a page. However, it was still super entertaining. I had a lot of fun reading this entire series, otherwise I wouldn't have continued. It's definitely not high on my recommendations list, but I still enjoyed it as a fantasy series. It was good entertainment, and that's what books are for, right? Continuing in the vein of wanting to finish off series that I started, I read Castle in the Air by Diana Wynne Jones. This is the second book in the Howl's Moving Castle series, and I have read it before, so this was a reread for me. This follows Abdullah, who is a carpet merchant, and he spends all day daydreaming, and then one day all of his daydreams seem to be coming true. The characters from the first book are definitely more tied to the story than I initially remembered. I kind of felt like their personalities were a little bit off. I don't know if that's because I'm not in Sophie's head anymore, but she didn't really seem to match up very well. I think Calcifer and Howl did, but no, even Howl was a little bit weird. I don't know if it's just because we didn't spend as much time with them being in Abdullah's head. It's very much Abdullah's story, but the characterization felt a little bit weird for them. The plot was also a little bit ridiculous, but then again, I guess so was Howl's Moving Castle. I didn't notice it as much in Howl's, but this one it was very like all of these things coming out of left field and like, oh, everyone's really this person, and it's kind of just got repetitive. Things weren't really making sense, and I was honestly getting a little bit bored. So I definitely didn't like this book as much as I liked Howl's Moving Castle. It was just fine, but it wasn't really something I was excited about or excited to read at any point. There were also a few issues I had with some body image things in the beginning and sort of at the end of the book, so I wanted to make note of that as well if that would bother you. But overall, I just kind of felt meh about this book. I did, however, continue on to the final book in the series, House of Many Ways, also by Diana Wynne Jones, obviously, because it's the same series. And this one was also very weird. I'm not really sure what the plot was. It's about a girl who goes to take care of her great uncle's house, and he's a wizard, so his house is kind of like magical. And again, the characters from Howl's Moving Castle show up again, and even some of the ones from Castle in the Air show up in this book, but they're also not the main focus of the story. They're sort of side characters. But I thought their characterization in this book was actually more closely aligned with the first book rather than the second book, so that was interesting. I really have no idea what happened there in the second book. But while those characters confused me in the second book, it was the plot that confused me in the third book. There wasn't really one that I could discern. It was full of magical shenanigans, which I love. It was a house that you could turn different ways and it would lead you to totally different places and transport you places, and that was really fun to read about. But there was no real point. So I don't really know. It was just fine. It's actually making me question if I like Howl's Moving Castle so much because of nostalgia or if it's actually a good book. And that's not a fun space to be in. I like to think it's not just me. I hope. Please. But I definitely think these last two books in the series were nowhere near the caliber of the first book at all. I am glad that I read them though and finally finished out the series that I started literally years ago. The next book I read was Vessel by Lisa A. Nichols. This was the book pick for the Sword and Laser book club this month. And this is about a woman who comes back from a space mission that was lost 6 years ago. And she has no memory of her mission or what happened to her crew as she comes back alone. I feel like this is kind of literary fiction parading as a sci-fi, which is not a bad thing. It was really very interesting. It's a lot more focused on the relationships and the repercussions that her coming back after being presumed dead for 6 years has on like her family and the world and the people around her. It's definitely slower paced and there were times when I was bored. But there was also this underlying mystery of like what actually happened on this mission. Why did she come back after 6 years of being presumed dead and have no idea what happened? The mystery is what really kept me reading, and the fact that it's a pretty short book. It is a debut novel, so I found some issues with the writing, particularly when she would end almost every chapter with a rhetorical question. It got so annoying. I was basically rolling my eyes at the end of every chapter. According to the people in the Sword and Laser book club, the science in this is bad. I would not know. I don't really read sci-fi. This is probably like the 4th sci-fi book I've read ever. So I didn't notice anything, but at the same time, there were a bunch of acronyms that I just had no idea about because I don't read sci-fi. I'm not familiar with space travel anything. I think this book was interesting, but it definitely had its flaws, and I don't think I will be continuing this series. Next, I read The Mermaid's Daughter by Anne Claycomb. This is a Little Mermaid retelling, but based off of the Hans Christian Andersen fairy tale rather than the Disney movie. It's actually very similar to the Book of Speculation, which I have this one, Book of Speculation by Erica Swyler, where you have this family of mermaids, in this case circus mermaids in The Mermaid's Daughter Actual Mermaids, who all die very young. And while I thought this book was okay, I think The Mermaid's Daughter is a little bit better. The Book of Speculation took a more creepy circus vibe, where The Mermaid's Daughter is a lot more mystical and more tied to the sea. It's told from multiple point of views, which made the audiobook really good because they got different people for each point of view, which I really enjoyed. The Sea Witch's point of view was my absolute favorite. The tone was spot on. It was creepy and written so well. I enjoyed that part so much. But a lot of the other story is very heavily music and opera focused, which was interesting because I'm interested in music, but can be overbearing because I know absolutely nothing about the opera, and it's very, very detailed about opera. I wasn't finding myself like floundering and unable to understand anything, but I also wasn't completely aware of everything they were talking about, I guess. I thought the character dynamics were done really well. I could understand and empathize with all of the characters and all of their motivations. There was also a female-female relationship in this, which was very nice to see. One thing I noticed about the writing is the ocean metaphors were very overdone and very heavy-handed. It's literally at any point in time, anything is compared to the ocean, which I guess makes sense because it's The Little Mermaid, but at the same time, you don't need to do it for every single thing she sees. As far as the plot goes, the resolution was a little bit questionable, but I wasn't too mad at it because I found the story to just be so interesting and so captivating. I have always loved the ocean and mermaids, and specifically The Little Mermaid is my favorite Disney princess. So it's a bit unsurprising, but I think this actually did a really good job of retelling the Hans Christian Andersen tale. I read that a couple years ago now, and the way that that's incorporated into this story I think was very well done. And the last book that I actually started this morning and finished this afternoon was Midwinter Blood by Marcus Sedgwick. It is a very short book, so I'm not too surprised, and I was listening to it on audiobook basically all day at work today. But outside of that, it was so enchanting. It's told in 7 parts, and it's about 2 lovers who always find themselves over different lifetimes. But the atmosphere is just so chilling and magical. It's set on this remote island, and it involves like ancient nature magic, and it just transports you to this other world. Part of that might also have been the like Celtic pagan music that was playing in the audiobook at the end of each section. That could have contributed to it, but it was done really well. It really fit with the story, and it definitely enhanced my listening experience. It's definitely not a particularly unique storyline, but I think it was executed well, and it was never boring. I always wanted to figure out what was happening on this little island and what happened in the past and how was everything tied together. So it did a really good job of keeping me engaged, and I love that sort of old magic atmosphere. I eat it up. So I really did enjoy this book, even though I wasn't expecting to, because the cover I saw kind of looked like those very angsty YA covers from like 2011, which I think is when this was written. So it definitely surprised me when there was more to it than that. And that is all I read this month. It's not that much, which is not very surprising considering I was traveling in the beginning of the month, and then I got my wisdom teeth extracted, and then this past week I had food poisoning, so it's just been like hit after hit for me, but hopefully next month will be better. I will be participating in the Disney-a-thon. I have a TBR going up for that, but otherwise I will see you next week. Bye!